I sat alone at our reserved table for 3 hours on our anniversary, watching couples around me share intimate moments while my phone buzzed with his excuses. What Trevor didn't know was that while he was standing me up, I was quietly finalizing the acquisition of his family's restaurant chain, the same empire he'd been bragging about inheriting for the past 2 years. Before we dive back in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story hit home, hit that subscribe button. I've got something really special lined up for tomorrow. The reservation was for 7 p.m. at Lumière, the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Ashmont. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the midnight blue dress Trevor had bought me for my birthday last year, back when he still remembered things like that mattered to me. The hostess, a polished woman named Celeste with perfectly straightened auburn hair, had seated me at table 12, corner booth, candlelit, overlooking the city's twinkling skyline. The kind of table you had to book months in advance, the kind Trevor's name could get us because his family owned half the upscale dining establishments in Ashmont County. "He'll be here shortly," I told Celeste when she asked if I'd like to wait or order a drink. I ordered a glass of the Chablis we'd shared on our first date 3 years ago. Back then, Trevor had been charming, attentive, full of dreams about expanding his family's business empire. Back then, I thought I'd found my partner. By 7:30, the Chablis was gone, and my phone buzzed with the first text. "Running late, babe. Client emergency. Start without me if you want." I didn't start without him. I ordered another glass of wine and watched a couple at the table across from me share a dessert, laughing over something on her phone. The woman caught my eye and smiled sympathetically, the universal look women give each other when we recognize the signs of being stood up. At 8:15, another text. "This is taking longer than expected. Maybe we should reschedule?" Reschedule? On our 3-year anniversary? The anniversary he'd promised would be special, different from all the other times his work had come first? I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on a simple, "I'll wait." Because here's what Trevor didn't know about the woman sitting patiently in that corner booth, nursing her second glass of wine while other diners whispered and glanced my way with pity. He didn't know that client emergency was code for the weekly poker game he thought I didn't know about. He didn't know that I'd driven past Mackenzie's apartment, his college buddy who hosted those games, and seen his Tesla in the driveway. But more importantly, he didn't know what I'd been doing during all those evenings he'd abandoned me for work. While he was out playing cards and making excuses, I'd been building something that would change both our lives forever. The hostess returned at 8:45, her expression a careful balance of professionalism and concern. "Ms. Ramirez, would you like me to move you to the bar? It might be more comfortable." "I'm fine here, thank you," I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach your eyes but keeps people from asking more questions. "He'll be here." She nodded, but I caught her exchanging a look with one of the servers. I'd become that woman, the one everyone felt sorry for, the one whose boyfriend couldn't be bothered to show up on their anniversary, in a restaurant his family owned no less. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed again at 9:20. "Look, this is really important. Rain check on dinner? I'll make it up to you, I promise." I stared at the message for a long moment. Around me, Lumière hummed with the sounds of successful dates, celebration dinners. Couples who actually showed up for each other. The couple that had been sharing dessert earlier was gone, replaced by a business dinner where everyone seemed more interested in their phones than conversation. I typed back, "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." And I wasn't, because while Trevor was laying down cards and making bets he thought I'd never discover, I was about to play a hand he couldn't possibly see coming. 3 hours of sitting alone had given me plenty of time to think, to plan, to prepare for what would happen next. At 10 p.m., exactly 3 hours after our reservation time, I finally stood up. Celeste appeared immediately, as if she'd been watching me all evening. She said, "I'm so sorry. If there's anything we can do..." I said, "Actually, there is," pulling out my business card, not the one from my day job at Morrison & Associates Marketing, but the other one, the one with my name and the title Trevor never bothered to ask about. "Could you give this to your general manager?
Tell him I'd like to schedule a meeting about the Ashmont Restaurant Group acquisition. Celeste took the card, her eyes widening as she read it. Of course, Ms. Ramirez, I'll make sure he gets this first thing tomorrow.
I left a generous tip for the server who'd kept my water glass filled and my bread basket stocked throughout the evening, even though I'd barely touched either. As I walked toward the exit, passing tables full of couples who'd managed to show up for each other, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not even disappointment anymore. Relief. Because tonight, while Trevor had been choosing poker chips over promises, he'd given me the perfect opening for what came next. And what came next was going to change everything between us, just not in the way he'd ever imagined possible. The valet brought my car around, a modest Honda Civic that Trevor often complained wasn't on brand for someone dating into his family. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Ashmont, past the other restaurants and businesses that bore the Whitmore name, I thought about the meeting I had scheduled for tomorrow morning. The meeting where everything Trevor thought he knew about his future, about our relationship, about who held the real power, would be turned completely upside down. I pulled into my driveway at 10:47 p.m., 3 hours and 47 minutes after Trevor had first stood me up. My phone had been silenced since his last excuse. He probably assumed I'd gone home disappointed, maybe crying, certainly ready to forgive him like I always had before. He had no idea that tomorrow would be the day I stopped being the woman who waited. Tomorrow would be the day I became the woman who owned everything he'd taken for granted. This one took us ages to get right, so if you're loving it, hitting subscribe would honestly mean the world to us. Okay, back to business. The truth was, I'd been planning this moment for 8 months, ever since the day I discovered Trevor's real priorities. Not literally planning to buy his family's empire. That opportunity had fallen into my lap just 6 weeks ago. But I'd been preparing for the day I'd stop being the woman who accepted excuses and start being the woman who demanded better. It began last December, the night of his company Christmas party. Trevor had promised it would be our night, that he'd finally introduce me properly to his family as more than just a friend. I'd bought a new dress, spent hours getting ready, practiced conversations in my head about wedding plans and future goals, all of the things couples discuss after 3 years together. Instead, I spent the evening watching him work the room while I stood alone by the appetizer table, nursing a single glass of champagne and making polite conversations with wives who clearly had no idea who I was. When his mother, Patricia Whitmore, asked what I did for work, Trevor interrupted before I could answer. "Oh, she's in marketing," he said dismissively, already turning toward a potential business contact. Nothing too exciting. Nothing too exciting. 3 years of relationship reduced to a casual wave-off. That was the night I stopped sharing my real work with Trevor, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation, because nothing too exciting was actually a very carefully constructed understatement. My day job at Morrison & Associates was indeed marketing, but Morrison & Associates wasn't just any marketing firm. We were corporate acquisition specialists, the people companies hired when they wanted to buy other companies quietly, strategically, without tipping off competitors or triggering panic sells. And I wasn't just any marketing coordinator. I was senior partner James Morrison's secret weapon, the person who researched target companies so thoroughly that I could predict their vulnerabilities, their pressure points, their exact value down to the last dollar. For the past 18 months, I'd been working on the biggest acquisition of my career. Meridian Holdings, a private equity firm from Chicago, wanted to expand into the restaurant industry. They needed someone who understood the local market, who could identify the right target companies, who could move through due diligence without raising red flags. They needed someone who could get close to the Whitmore Restaurant Group without anyone suspecting a thing. The irony was delicious. While Trevor had been treating me like an accessory, introducing me as his marketing girlfriend at family dinners and business events, I'd been documenting every conversation, every financial detail, every operational weakness I overheard. Not maliciously, at first it was just professional habit. I collected information the way other people collected stamps.
But the more I learned about the Whitmore empire, the clearer it became that the company was in trouble, real trouble. The first red flag was the debt ratio. During a family barbecue last summer, Trevor's father, Charles Whitmore, had been complaining about cash flow challenges and temporary loan restructuring. To most people, that sounded like normal business talk. To someone who specialized in corporate acquisitions, it sounded like a company hemorrhaging money. The second red flag was the staff turnover. Every time we ate at one of their restaurants, there were new faces, new managers who didn't know the systems, new servers who couldn't answer basic questions about the menu. Trevor complained about it constantly, but he blamed people not wanting to work anymore instead of examining why his family's restaurants couldn't retain employees.
The third red flag was Trevor himself. For someone supposedly being groomed to take over a multi-million-dollar restaurant empire, he spent an awful lot of time at poker games and golf courses, and very little time actually learning the business. His involvement seemed limited to showing up at family meetings to complain about profit margins he didn't understand. By February, I had enough information to know that Whitmore Restaurant Group was exactly the kind of struggling but valuable company Meridian Holdings specialized in acquiring. Established brand recognition, prime real estate locations, but poor management and mounting debt that made them vulnerable to the right offer. The ethical thing would have been to recuse myself from the project, tell James Morrison I had a conflict of interest, and recommend another researcher. Walk away from the biggest professional opportunity of my career to protect my boyfriend's family business. I might have done that if Trevor had been a different kind of man, if he'd treated me as a partner instead of an accessory, if he'd shown up for our anniversaries and remembered my birthday and introduced me with pride instead of dismissal. But Trevor wasn't that kind of man, and by March, I'd made my choice. I spent the next 4 months building the most comprehensive acquisition proposal I'd ever created. Every Whitmore restaurant, analyzed down to the square footage and customer demographics, every debt obligation, cataloged and verified, every operational inefficiency, documented with potential solutions. Meridian Holdings was impressed. More than impressed, they were ready to move forward immediately with a buyout offer that would give them controlling interest in the Whitmore Restaurant Group within 60 days. The final signature had happened 3 days ago, while Trevor was out of town on what he'd called a business trip, but which I knew was actually a golf weekend with his college fraternity brothers. I'd spent that Tuesday morning in James Morrison's office watching him finalize the paperwork that would make Meridian Holdings the new majority owner of 13 upscale restaurants, including Lumière. "Beautiful work, Camila," James had said, using my real name for the first time in months. "This is the kind of deal that makes careers." He was right. The commission alone would be enough for me to start my own consulting firm. The professional recognition would open doors I'd never even imagined. And the personal satisfaction, well, that was something I was still processing. Because the woman who had signed those papers wasn't the same woman who had stood by quietly while Trevor dismissed her as nothing too exciting. That woman had learned to value herself properly. She'd learned that power wasn't something you waited for someone to give you, it was something you built, strategically and patiently, until the moment was right to use it. Tomorrow morning, Meridian Holdings would begin the formal transition process. By the end of the week, every Whitmore restaurant would have new ownership, new management, and new policies that prioritized employee retention and customer experience over family legacy and ego. Trevor still had no idea. He thought his biggest problem was deciding between the fish special and the steak at his poker game. He had no idea that while he was betting with pocket change, I'd been playing a much larger game, and I'd already won. The only question left was how I wanted to tell him. And after 3 hours of being stood up on our anniversary, I knew exactly how that conversation was going to go. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30 a.m. with the kind of clarity that only comes after making a life-changing decision.
Trevor's side of the bed was cold. He'd never come home last night. No surprise there. According to the timestamp on his last text, sent at 2:17 a.m., he was crashing at Mackenzie's because he'd had too many to drink. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen, watching the sunrise paint Ashmont's skyline in shades of gold and rose. In exactly 4 hours, I had a meeting that would reshape everything Trevor thought he knew about his future. But first, I had work to do. My phone buzzed with a text from Meridian Chen. Meridian wants to accelerate timeline. Can we move transition meeting to Friday? Friday, 3 days away. I typed back, perfect, I'll handle the preliminary notifications. What James didn't realize, what I'd kept deliberately vague in all our planning sessions, was how personally connected I was to this acquisition. He knew I'd developed excellent inside access to the Whitmore operations, but he assumed it was through professional networking, maybe a well-placed contact in their accounting department. He had no idea I'd been sleeping next to his target company's heir apparent for 3 years. The ethical implications weren't lost on me, but ethics, I'd learned, were a luxury for people who were treated with basic respect. Trevor had forfeited any claim to my professional loyalty the moment he started treating me like an inconvenience rather than a partner. My first call was to Rebecca Chen, Meridian's transition specialist. She was already awake. Rebecca was one of those frighteningly efficient women who treated 6 a.m. phone calls like normal business hours. "Camilla, perfect timing," she said without preamble. "I've been reviewing your files all night. The debt-to-asset analysis is extraordinary. How did you get access to their private lending agreements?" "Industry connections," I said smoothly. It wasn't technically a lie. Trevor's late-night phone calls with his father about liquidity issues had been very illuminating, especially when he thought I was asleep.
"Well, however you did it, we're moving forward immediately. I need you to coordinate with each restaurant's current management team. We'll need operational assessments, staff evaluations, and lease reviews completed before Friday." Rebecca was thorough, but she didn't understand the Whitmore family dynamics the way I did. Charles Whitmore ran his restaurants like personal fiefdoms, with managers who reported directly to him and bypassed normal corporate structures. Getting operational assessments would require a different approach. "I'll handle the management coordination," I told Rebecca, "but I recommend we prepare for some resistance. This is a family business with deep emotional ties." "Emotional ties don't pay creditors," Rebecca said briskly. "Get me those assessments. And Camila, excellent work on this project. After Friday, we should discuss your future with Meridian on a more permanent basis." After Friday, my future was going to look very different in ways Rebecca couldn't imagine. My second call was to Patricia Valdez, the general manager at Lumière. I'd met her briefly at company events, and she'd always struck me as competent but frustrated, the kind of professional who could see problems but lacked the authority to fix them. "Ms. Valdez," she said when I identified myself, "I got your card from Celeste last night. I have to say, I was surprised." "I imagine you were. Are you free for coffee this morning? I'd like to discuss some opportunities that might interest you." We met at a small cafe called Grounded, deliberately chosen because it wasn't a Whitmore property. Patricia arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio that suggested she'd done her homework about Morrison & Associates overnight. "I looked up your firm," she said as we settled into a corner booth. "Corporate acquisitions. I assume this is about the restaurant group." Patricia was sharper than I'd given her credit for. "What would you think about that possibility?" She was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into her coffee with deliberate precision. "Honestly, it might be the best thing that could happen to these restaurants. Mr. Whitmore is a good man, but he's stuck in 1985. We're hemorrhaging staff because he won't approve competitive wages. We're losing customers because he won't invest in renovations. And Trevor?" She shook her head. "Trevor thinks managing restaurants means showing up to taste wine and complain about food costs." What if I told you there might be an opportunity for new management, new investment, and actual operational authority? Patricia's eyes sharpened. "I'd ask what you need from me." I slid a business card across the table, not my Morrison and Associates card, but a new one I'd had printed yesterday. Ramirez Restaurant Consultant. I need honest assessments of each location, staff morale, operational efficiency, profit potential under proper management. Think you can handle that? When do you need it? Thursday night. Patricia smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. Consider it done. My third meeting was the most delicate. Michael Santos had been the head chef at Lumière for 6 years, long enough to remember when the Whitmore restaurants were actually prestigious places to work. But Michael was also Trevor's drinking buddy, the person he'd called his only real friend in the business. I found Michael in Lumière's kitchen during the afternoon prep period, working alongside his sous chefs to prepare for the evening service. The kitchen smelled like garlic and fresh herbs, but underneath that was the tension I'd started recognizing in all the Whitmore properties: good people working too hard for too little appreciation. "Camilla," he said when he saw me, wiping his hands on his apron, "haven't seen you since the anniversary disaster. Trevor said you were understanding about his emergency." "Trevor says a lot of things," I replied evenly. "Can we talk privately?" We walked to a small office off the main kitchen, a cluttered space that smelled like coffee and contained more empty energy drink cans than I had expected from someone who created beautiful food for a living. "Michael, how long have you known Trevor?" "Since culinary school." "Why?" "And in all that time, how many of his promises has he actually kept?" Michael's expression shifted. "That's a weird question, Camila." "Is it? He promised you partial ownership in the next restaurant they opened. That was 2 years ago. He promised to approve your menu expansion. He promised to let you hire 2 more line cooks so your staff wouldn't be working 14-hour days." Each statement landed like a small blow. Michael sat down heavily in his desk chair. "You've been paying attention." "I always pay attention. The question is, what would you do if someone offered you the authority to run these kitchens the way they should be run?" "Hypothetically." "Hypothetically." Michael was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a worn notebook, pages filled with handwritten notes and sketches. "I've been designing a new training program for 2 years. Staff development, menu innovation, cost control that doesn't sacrifice quality. Trevor keeps saying we'll implement it next quarter." He looked up at me. "But next quarter never comes, does it?" "Not under current management," I agreed. "But things change." "What are you really asking me, Camila?" I leaned forward. "I'm asking if you'd be interested in being part of something better, something that values your expertise instead of taking it for granted." Michael stared at me for a long moment. "Does Trevor know about this conversation?" "Trevor doesn't know about a lot of things. The question is whether you want to keep waiting for him to notice your value or if you're ready to work with people who already see it."
He closed the notebook and slid it across the desk to me. "If you're serious about change, take a look at this. But Camila, whatever you're planning, Trevor's not going to take it well." "Trevor's going to have bigger problems than his feelings," I said, accepting the notebook. "But you don't. Not if you make the right choice." By Thursday evening, I had everything I needed. Patricia's operational assessments painted a clear picture of restaurants with excellent potential hobbled by poor leadership. Michael's training proposals showed exactly how to transform the kitchens from barely functional to industry-leading. Rebecca's transition timeline meant that by Monday morning, Meridian Holdings would officially own 13 restaurants that could be profitable again within 6 months. And Trevor still had no idea any of this was happening. His texts throughout the week had been typically self-centered. Complaints about his hangover Tuesday, excitement about a big business meeting Wednesday that I knew was actually a lunch with his golf buddies, a casual suggestion that we do something nice this weekend to make up for missing our anniversary. As if 3 hours of public humiliation could be fixed with a casual dinner and his usual charming smile. I spent Thursday night organizing all the documentation into neat folders,
each one labeled with the restaurant name and containing enough evidence to justify every decision Meridian would make. Tomorrow's meeting wasn't just about transferring ownership. It was about demonstrating that this acquisition was strategic, necessary, and ultimately beneficial for everyone except the people who had been taking it all for granted. Trevor's key was still on my kitchen counter where he'd left it Tuesday morning, next to a coffee mug ring and a crumpled receipt from the gas station. Such a small thing, that key. For 3 years, it had represented his casual assumption that my space was his space, that my life revolved around his convenience. Tomorrow, after the meeting, I'd mail it back to him, along with everything else he'd left in my apartment. Clean, simple, final. Because the woman who had waited 3 hours on Tuesday night was done making room in her life for people who couldn't be bothered to show up. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. I dressed carefully, the same charcoal gray suit I'd worn to sign the acquisition papers, paired with the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for luck. Professional armor for what was about to become a very personal battle. The Meridian Holdings meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Morrison & Associates' downtown offices. Trevor had no idea it was happening. As far as he knew, I was spending my Friday morning doing marketing stuff while he slept off another late night at Mackenzie's apartment. James Morrison's corner office had been transformed into a war room. Rebecca Chen sat at the head of the polished conference table, surrounded by stacks of contracts, financial reports, and transition documents. Beside her sat David Kim, Meridian's legal counsel, and Amanda Foster, their operations specialist. This was the team that would reshape the Whitmore Restaurant Group into something profitable. "Camila," Rebecca said as I entered, "excellent timing. We were just reviewing your operational assessments. The staff turnover data alone justifies this acquisition." I took my seat across from them, placing my leather portfolio on the table with practiced calm. Patricia Valdez's management reports confirm what we suspected. These restaurants are bleeding money because of poor leadership, not poor concept. David Kim looked up from his legal documents. "The debt situation is worse than we initially projected. They're 3 months behind on their primary loan payments, and their vendors are demanding cash on delivery. Without intervention, they'll be in bankruptcy by Christmas." "Which is exactly why our timeline is perfect," Amanda added. "We can restructure the debt, retain the viable staff, and implement new management systems before the holiday season. Minimal disruption to revenue." Rebecca nodded, then looked directly at me. "Your inside knowledge of their operations has been invaluable, Camila. I have to ask, are you prepared for the family's reaction when they realize how thoroughly they've been outmaneuvered?" Before I could answer, James Morrison's assistant knocked and entered. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a Trevor Whitmore here to see Miss Ramirez. He says it's urgent." The room fell silent. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Friend of yours?" "Boyfriend," I said calmly, though my heart rate had just doubled. "Ex-boyfriend, as of about 5 minutes from now." Amanda leaned forward. "Should we postpone?" "Absolutely not," I replied, standing up. "In fact, this timing is perfect. David, are the ownership transfer documents ready for signature?" "Ready and notarized." "Then let's finish this properly." I turned to James's assistant. "Please show Trevor Whitmore to conference room B. Tell him I'll be with him shortly." Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all week. This should be interesting. The final signatures took exactly 12 minutes. Meridian Holdings officially became the majority owner of 13 restaurants, 6 commercial properties, and approximately $8 million in restructured debt. My commission would be deposited Monday morning. My professional reputation was made. And Trevor still had no idea any of this was happening.
I found him pacing beside the windows in conference room B, still wearing yesterday's clothes and looking like he'd slept in his car. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled faintly of stale beer and cigarettes. "Camila, thank God," he said when I entered. "We need to talk. Something's happened." "I'm sure it has," I replied, closing the door behind me and taking a seat at the small conference table. "Why don't you sit down and tell me about it?" Trevor remained standing, running his hands through his hair in agitation. "My dad called this morning. Someone's been asking questions about our restaurants. Financial questions. He thinks we might be getting audited or investigated or something worse." "Interesting. What kind of questions?" "I don't know exactly, but Patricia at Lumière said some woman has been requesting operational data, and Michael mentioned someone asking about staff management policies. Dad's freaking out because our books aren't—" He paused. "Well, they're complicated." "Complicated how?" Trevor looked at me sharply. "Why are you being so calm about this? If something happens to the business, it affects both of us. Our future, our plans." "Our plans?" I kept my voice level, curious. "What plans are those, Trevor?" He stopped pacing and stared at me. "You know, marriage, kids, the house in Riverside Heights we looked at. I was going to propose next month, after this business stuff settled down." The admission hung in the air between us like smoke. After 3 years of avoiding commitment, of introducing me as just a friend, of dismissing my career and standing me up on our anniversary, he'd been planning to propose, not because he'd suddenly realized my worth, but because he needed a wife to complete his image as a serious businessman. "That's very thoughtful of you. I am sorry. Your timing is a bit off." "What do you mean?" I opened my portfolio and removed a single sheet of paper, the ownership transfer document, with my signature clearly visible at the bottom. I slid it across the table to him. Trevor picked it up, frowning as he read. His frown deepened. Then his face went white. "What is this?" "Exactly what it looks like. As of 45 minutes ago, Meridian Holdings owns 68% of the Whitmore Restaurant Group. The acquisition was finalized this morning." He read the document again, as if the words might change. "This is impossible. Dad would never sell, and definitely not to some random company from Chicago." "He didn't sell voluntarily. The debt situation forced a buyout. Meridian Holdings acquired the outstanding loan obligations and exercised their right to convert debt to equity." "But how would they even know about our financial problems? That information is private." "Confidential." Trevor's voice trailed off as he looked up at me. Really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in months. His eyes moved to my business suit, to the portfolio open in front of me, to the confident way I was sitting while his world crumbled around him. "No," he said quietly. "Morrison & Associates specializes in corporate acquisitions. I've been working on this project for 8 months. "No," he said again, louder this time. "You're in marketing. You do campaigns and social media posts and—" "Nothing too exciting. That's what you told your mother at the Christmas party, remember? When she asked about my career, you said I did nothing too exciting." Trevor sank into the chair across from me, the document still clutched in his shaking hands. "You did this because you hurt my feelings at a party? I did this because you've spent 3 years treating me like an accessory instead of a partner. The Christmas party was just the moment I realized it wasn't going to change." "But the restaurants, they're our family legacy. My grandfather started this business. My dad built it into something real." "Your dad built it into something that was 3 months away from bankruptcy. Meridian Holdings will restructure the debt, implement proper management systems, and turn those restaurants into profitable businesses they should have been all along." Trevor's face had gone from white to red. "And what about me? What about my future? I was supposed to inherit." "You were supposed to earn it. When was the last time you spent a full day learning about restaurant operations? When did you last review a profit and loss statement?
or talk to staff about working conditions, or even eat at one of your own restaurants when you weren't complaining about the service? He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, because we both knew the answer. The new management structure will have positions for people who want to work. Patricia Valdez will be promoted to regional manager. Michael Santos will oversee all kitchen operations with actual authority to implement his training programs. There might even be room for you, if you're willing to start at the bottom and learn the business properly. Start at the bottom? Trevor's voice cracked. These are my family's restaurants. Were your family's restaurants. Now they're businesses that will be run by people who understand that success requires work, not just birthright.
Trevor stood up abruptly, the document fluttering to the floor. This is insane! You're insane! You destroyed my family's business because I missed one dinner? I saved 13 restaurants and about 40 jobs because your family was running them into the ground. And I didn't miss one dinner, Trevor. You missed one dinner. Tuesday night, our 3-year anniversary, while you were playing poker and lying to me about client emergencies. For a moment, he looked genuinely confused. Tuesday? But that was just... we can reschedule. We could have rescheduled if you'd asked instead of assuming, if you'd apologized instead of making excuses, if you'd treated our relationship like it mattered instead of something you could put on hold whenever something more interesting came along. The silence stretched between us. Outside the conference room windows, downtown Ashmont hummed with Friday afternoon energy. People finishing work weeks, making weekend plans, and showing up for the commitments they'd made. Finally, Trevor picked up the document from the floor. So what happens now? Now you figure out what you want to do with your life, without assuming I'll be waiting around for you to decide I'm worth your time. And us? I stood up, closing my portfolio with a soft click. There is no us, Trevor. There hasn't been for a long time. I just finally stopped pretending otherwise. As I walked toward the door, Trevor called after me. Camila, wait, we can work this out. We can... No, we can't. Because working things out requires 2 people who show up for each other, and you never learned how to do that. The door closed behind me with the same soft finality as it had at Lumière 5 days ago. But this time, I wasn't the one being left behind. 3 months later, I stood in the renovated kitchen of Lumière, watching Michael Santos train a new line of sous chefs with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't seen from him in years. The kitchen gleamed with new equipment, the staff moved with confidence instead of desperation, and the dinner service that had once been chaos was now a carefully orchestrated symphony. The plating technique needs to be consistent, Michael was saying to a young chef named Carmen, guiding her hands as she arranged garnishes. Remember, we're not just serving food, we're creating an experience. It was the kind of training Trevor had always promised to fund but never did. Under Meridian's ownership, it had been implemented within the first month, along with competitive wages, proper scheduling software, and a staff retention program had reduced turnover by 70%. Patricia Valdez appeared beside me, carrying a tablet and wearing the confident expression of someone who finally had the authority to match her competence. The numbers for November are exceptional. Revenue is up 32% across all locations, and customer satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in 5 years. Staff morale? Night and day. We're actually having to turn away job applications now. Apparently, word has gotten around that Meridian restaurants are good places to work. I smiled at that. It was exactly what we'd hoped for, a transformation that went beyond profit margins to create something genuinely sustainable. Any word from the Whitmore family? Patricia's expression grew more careful. Charles came by last week. He looked smaller somehow. Asked if there might be consulting opportunities, maybe helping with the transition to new systems. What did you tell him? That I'd pass along his resume to corporate, same as anyone else. It was the right answer, though I knew it couldn't have been easy. Patricia had worked for the Whitmores for 8 years, had weathered their poor decisions and condescending treatment with professional grace. Now she had the power to reshape the company culture entirely,
and she was using it wisely. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca Chen. Ashmont Project case study presentation approved for Chicago conference. They want you to present personally. Career opportunity discussion to follow. The Chicago conference. 3,000 restaurant industry professionals, including investors who could fund my own consulting firm. 6 months ago, I was the marketing coordinator nobody took seriously. Now, I was being invited to present at the industry's most prestigious event. I typed back, "Honored to accept. When do you need my materials?" Her response was immediate. "Already handled. Your reputation precedes you now." That evening, I drove to my new apartment in Riverside Heights, the same neighborhood where Trevor had once pointed out houses we might buy together someday. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could now afford the down payment he had always claimed we needed to save for together. The apartment was a corner unit with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Ashmont's downtown skyline. Every light in my old office building was visible from my living room, including the conference room where everything had changed that Friday morning 3 months ago. I poured myself a glass of wine, not the Chablis from our first date, but a Bordeaux I'd discovered on my own, and settled onto my couch with my laptop. The case study presentation was taking shape beautifully. A comprehensive analysis of how proper management systems, employee investment, and strategic restructuring could transform failing businesses into industry leaders.
The personal story behind it would remain private, of course. Professional presentations didn't need to include details about missed anniversaries or condescending boyfriends. But the business lessons were clear and replicable. Companies that invested in their people, instead of just their profits, saw measurable improvements in every meaningful metric. My doorbell rang at 8:30. Through the peephole, I saw Trevor standing in the hallway, holding a small bouquet of flowers and looking remarkably different from the disheveled man I'd left in that conference room. His hair was cut shorter, his clothes were more professional, and his posture suggested someone who'd been working physical jobs instead of playing poker. I considered not answering. We had nothing left to discuss, and I had moved on completely. But curiosity won. "Hello, Trevor," I said, opening the door, but not inviting him in. "Camila, you look successful." He gestured vaguely at my business attire, the apartment visible behind me, the confidence I carried now like a second skin. "I brought these for you, not because I want anything," he added quickly, "just because I owe you an apology." I accepted the flowers, simple white roses, surprisingly thoughtful. "You didn't need to come here, Trevor." "I know, but I needed to say this properly." He took a deep breath. "I've been working at Meridian's newest location, started as a prep cook 6 weeks ago." "That was unexpected. How's it going?" "Humbling," he said with a rueful smile. "Michael's been training me. Proper training, not the fake apprenticeship my dad used to talk about. I'm learning what it actually takes to run a kitchen, to manage people, to earn respect instead of expecting it." "That's good, Trevor. I'm glad you're working." "I wanted you to know that you were right about everything. I was entitled, lazy, dismissive of your career, dismissive of your worth." He paused. "I spent 3 years treating you like you were lucky to be with me, when the truth was, I was lucky you stayed as long as you did." The apology was more honest than I had expected. "Thank you for saying that. I also wanted you to know that what you did, the acquisition, the way you rebuilt those restaurants, it wasn't just business. It was necessary. My family was destroying something that could have been great, and you saved it." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but found only genuine remorse. "What happens now for you?" "I keep learning, keep working. Maybe someday I'll understand the business well enough to run a kitchen properly or manage a restaurant that deserves good management. But that's years away, if ever." "And personally?" Trevor was quiet for a long moment. "I'm seeing someone, another chef, actually. Someone who calls me out when I'm being selfish, who expects me to show up when I say I will, who doesn't accept excuses." He smiled slightly.
Someone who's teaching me how to be a better partner by refusing to accept anything less. That was perhaps the best outcome I could have hoped for. Trevor actually learning from his mistakes instead of just resenting the consequences. "I'm happy for you," I said, and meant it. "Are you?" "Happy, I mean." I looked back at my apartment, at the city lights twinkling beyond my windows, at the laptop where my presentation materials were waiting to reshape my career. My phone rang as I was polishing the conclusion. The caller ID showed my grandmother's number from her assisted living facility in San Diego. "Mija," she said when I answered, her voice warm with pride, "I got your letter about the new job, the success with your project. Your mother is so proud, she's telling everyone at the grocery store." "Abuela, you don't have to brag to strangers." "I'm not bragging, I'm stating facts. My granddaughter took a company that was failing and made it successful. My granddaughter built a career from nothing and now speaks at conferences with important people. These are facts worth sharing." I smiled, feeling the warmth of her approval settle into my bones. "I learned it from you, Abuela. You always said that respect is earned, not given." "See, but you learned something I never taught you. You learn that sometimes you have to take the respect you've earned instead of waiting for someone to hand it to you." After we hung up, I returned to my presentation, but her words stayed with me. Taking the respect I'd earned instead of waiting for it to be given. That was exactly what I had done, wasn't it? For 3 years, I had waited for Trevor to recognize my worth, to treat me as an equal, to show up for our relationship the way I showed up for his life. I'd stopped waiting and started building something better.
The final slide of my presentation came together perfectly. A graph showing revenue growth, employee satisfaction, and customer retention across all 13 restaurants. Below it, a simple conclusion. Sustainable success requires investment in people, not just profit margins. When we treat human capital as our most valuable resource, everything else follows. As I saved the document and prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the dark windows overlooking Ashmont. The woman looking back at me was confident, successful, and genuinely content with the life she'd built. She wasn't waiting for anyone else to validate her choices or recognize her worth. She'd learned the most important lesson of all. The sweetest victory isn't revenge on those who underestimated you. It's building something so much better that their opinion becomes irrelevant. And that, I realized as I turned off the lights in my beautiful apartment filled with my own accomplishments, was a lesson worth sharing at conferences full of people who needed to hear it. The transformation was complete. Not just of 13 restaurants, but of the woman who'd been brave enough to stop accepting less than she deserved and start demanding everything she was worth. 2 incredible stories are waiting for you right below. If this one grabbed your attention, these next ones will too. Click to dive in.